What could make the mightiest warship on Earth vanish in less than 3 minutes? What kind of force could rip through 47,000 tons of British steel and silence more than 1,000 men in a single blinding flash? And why did it take 60 years for the world to finally uncover the truth? For 6 long decades, HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, lay hidden beneath the crushing silence of the Atlantic abyss. Once hailed as unsinkable, she was obliterated on May 24, 1941, a flash so violent that only 3 of her 1,418 crew survived. Britain mourned not only a ship, but a symbol, a floating fortress, thought to be invincible. Then, in 2001, technology finally reached where memory could not. When HMS Hood entered service in 1920, she was more than a warship. She was a statement. The largest and fastest capital ship ever built, stretching over 860 feet and armed with 8 15-inch guns, Hood embodied British naval supremacy between the wars. She was the floating pride of an empire that ruled the seas. Yet hidden beneath that majestic profile was a weakness waiting to be exposed. Her story began before the end of World War I. In 1916, the Battle of Jutland shocked the Royal Navy. 3 British battlecruisers exploded catastrophically when enemy shells pierced their decks and ignited magazines. The lesson was clear: speed and firepower meant nothing without protection. Hood, already under construction, was hastily redesigned. Engineers thickened her main belt and reinforced decks above critical spaces, adding thousands of tons of armor. But those upgrades came with compromise. The extra weight forced her bow lower into the sea, making her vulnerable to flooding in rough waters. Worse still, her protection remained uneven. While the belt could resist horizontal fire, her decks were still too thin to withstand shells plunging from high angles, a vulnerability few recognized at the time. By 1941, naval gunnery had evolved far beyond what Hood was built to endure. Engagements now began at extreme ranges, where shells arced high before crashing down in steep trajectories. The very design that once made her invincible had quietly become her doom. Even as HMS Hood dazzled the world with her size and speed, naval architects quietly understood that her protection was a delicate balancing act. Beneath the thick armor and grand reputation lay a structural compromises that would one day prove fatal. Tests with the Royal Navy's 15-inch armor-piercing shells revealed a disturbing truth. A well-placed shot could punch through the ship's middle belt, slip under the main deck slope, and detonate deep inside the magazine spaces. It was a weakness that no propaganda could conceal forever. Late in her construction, British engineers tried to patch the problem. 3-inch plates were added over the magazine slopes, and secondary guns were removed to offset the added weight. But the more ambitious plans, thicker deck armor forward and aft, were never realized. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 left no time for a full modernization. Hood sailed into combat carrying both her legacy and her flaws. By 1941, years of hard service had worn her down. Her turbines and boilers, once capable of 32 knots, could now barely push her past 26.5. Against newer German designs, like Bismarck, that difference meant fewer tactical options and slower reactions when it mattered most. Naval warfare had changed dramatically since her launch. Battles no longer opened at close range. Instead, ships fired at distances beyond 16,000 yards, where shells climbed high and plunged steeply back to Earth. Hood's protection, designed for horizontal fire, was now dangerously outdated. A single shell descending from above could exploit the narrow gap in her armor scheme. a flaw small enough to seem insignificant, yet lethal enough to destroy her entirely. The pride of the Royal Navy had become a paradox, formidable in presence, fragile in reality. Every inch of her gleaming steel carried an echo of an earlier war, and in the age of plunging fire, that past would soon come to claim her. At first light, on May 24, 1941, the gray waters of the Denmark Strait were silent, until the thunder of guns shattered the calm. HMS Hood and the newly commissioned Prince of Wales had found their quarry, the German battleship Bismarck and her escort, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. It was a duel between generations, between an aging legend and a new breed of war machine. At 5:52 a.m., Hood fired the opening salvo, her 15-inch guns booming across the sea. The British ships advanced rapidly, hoping to close the distance before the German vessels could bring their full firepower to bear. Captain Ralph Kerr ordered a turn to starboard, maneuvering to bring Hood's rear turrets into play. But that turn would expose her broadside at the worst possible moment. Within minutes, disaster struck. A shell from Prinz Eugen hit amidships, igniting a small fire near the boat deck. It seemed minor at first, until it became a perfect visual marker for the enemy's gunners. Then came Bismarck's fifth salvo, fired from about 16,500 yards away. The shells rose high, vanished into the clouds, and descended in shallow arcs toward Hood. An instant later, a blinding flash erupted near Hood's mainmast. A towering column of flame shot skyward as the ship's hull cracked open. Witnesses aboard Prince of Wales watched in horror as Hood disappeared inside a vast cloud of black smoke. Within 3 minutes, the pride of the Royal Navy was gone, split in two, and sinking fast beneath the freezing sea. Of the 1,418 men aboard, only 3 survived: signalman Ted Briggs, able seaman Robert Tilburn, and midshipman William Dundas. They clung to wreckage for 2 hours before being rescued by the destroyer HMS Electra. For the rest of their lives, they would carry the sound of that explosion, an echo that marked not only the end of Hood, but the end of an era in naval warfare. The sea had swallowed HMS Hood in less than 3 minutes, but it would take 6 decades for the world to understand why. In the immediate aftermath, grief turned to confusion. How could the pride of the Royal Navy, once thought unsinkable, be obliterated by a single shell? The official Admiralty communique offered a simple explanation. An unlucky hit had detonated one of her magazines. Yet for many within the Navy, the story didn't add up. The explosion was too fast, too total, too absolute. The first Board of Inquiry, convened within days, pointed to the aft magazines as the source of the explosion, blaming a 15-inch shell from Bismarck that had pierced the deck armor. The conclusion was neat, logical, and deeply unsatisfactory. Rear Admiral Harold Walker's second inquiry gathered 176 eyewitness accounts from Prince of Wales, refining but not resolving the cause. There were no survivors from the key compartments, no wreck to study, just fragments of testimony and speculation. As the decades passed, new theories emerged. Some claimed that torpedoes stored on deck had been hit by shell fire, triggering the explosion. Others believed a flash fire in the 4-inch ammunition lobbies could have raced down to the main magazines. A few even suggested a spontaneous cordite ignition, a tragic accident rather than a direct hit. Each explanation seemed plausible, but none could be proven. The mystery consumed historians, engineers, and veterans alike. Without physical evidence, the debate became a matter of interpretation. Every detail of the eyewitness accounts analyzed, every shell trajectory redrawn. It was as much about emotion as engineering. For the families of the 1,415 men lost, truth meant closure, not controversy. By the late 20th century, naval scholars like Bill Jurens, William Garsky, and Robert Houlihan combined new research in ballistics and ship design to revisit the evidence. They suspected that only the wreck itself could reveal the truth. The battle of theories had lasted 60 years, but the final verdict lay hidden, silent, and waiting in the deep. By the dawn of the new millennium, the mystery of HMS Hood had become one of naval history's longest unsolved puzzles. For 60 years, theories had filled books, documentaries, and debates, but no one had ever seen the truth with their own eyes. That changed in July 2001, when a British-led expedition set out to find her resting place in the cold depths of the Denmark Strait. Their mission was not just exploration, it was a forensic search for answers. The expedition was led by marine explorer David Mearns, whose team had spent months studying wartime records, survivor testimonies, and the last known coordinates reported by Prince of Wales. Their search grid covered miles of empty ocean floor, nearly 9,000 feet down. Using side-scan sonar, they began sending acoustic pulses through the dark, reading faint echoes for any sign of wreckage. 39 hours into the operation, a faint outline appeared, a scatter of twisted metal stretching across the seabed. The first contact wasn't the ship itself, but a debris field almost a mile long, fragments of steel lying like bones on the ocean floor. Following the trail, the ROV's cameras finally illuminated something immense, a massive bow section, upright and eerily intact, rising from the silt at 63 degrees 24.24 minutes north. As the cameras drifted aft, the extent of destruction came into view. The midsection was gone, torn open, flipped upside down, its metal twisted beyond recognition. The stern lay far away, detached from the rest of the ship. The evidence was undeniable. Hood had not been destroyed by a single contained blast, but by a massive internal breakup. When investigators examined the wreck of HMS Hood, the silence of the deep gave way to a story written in steel. 3 vast sections lay scattered across the seabed: the bow, the midship block, and the stern, each revealing part of the violent sequence that ended the pride of the Royal Navy. The ship's destruction was not random. It followed the unmistakable pattern of an internal magazine explosion. The stern provided the clearest evidence. It had broken away just forward of the rudder, precisely where the aft 15-inch magazines, turrets X and Y, were located. Along the starboard fracture, the plating wasn't cut cleanly. It was peeled outward, as if by a blast venting from within. This was the fingerprint of an internal explosion, not the puncture of an external hit. No evidence of torpedo damage could be found. The hull was intact along the lower plates, disproving theories that a secondary explosion or an external strike had torn her apart. Instead, investigators traced a likely path. A 380mm shell from Bismarck had penetrated the deck near the aft 4-inch magazine, detonated within, and sent a fireball down through open trunking into the main 15-inch magazines below. In a fraction of a second, thousands of pounds of cordite ignited, producing a catastrophic pressure wave that ripped the ship apart. The sheer violence of the explosion blew the aft turrets clear and sheared the stern from the hull. The midsection flipped upside down as the ship's internal structure collapsed. Even a secondary blast near the bow hinted that fire had reached forward magazines during the final moments. What the deep finally revealed was not just the cause of an explosion, it was the end of an era. The wreck of HMS Hood, resting quietly at the bottom of the Denmark Strait, became more than twisted steel. It became a monument to courage, sacrifice, and the limits of human confidence. In 2001, the mystery was solved. The ship had been destroyed by a catastrophic internal magazine explosion, triggered by a single shell from Bismarck. The truth, buried for 60 years, had finally surfaced. In 2002, the British government officially declared the site a protected war grave under the Protection of Military Remains Act. Beneath nearly 2 miles of water lie the remains of 1,415 men who never returned home. In 2015, divers recovered Hood's bell, a single solemn relic now displayed at the National Museum of the Royal Navy. It rings once each year to honor those who rest below, a haunting echo from the depths. Her loss, and soon after the sinkings of Repulse and Prince of Wales, marked the end of the battle cruiser age. The sea had claimed its titans, and naval warfare had entered a new chapter, one ruled not by armor, but by aircraft and innovation. The story of HMS Hood reminds us that even the strongest among us carry unseen weaknesses. Pride and power mean little against time, chance, and change. What endures is not the steel we build, but the courage we show when it fails. Like those who served aboard her, we too must face our storms, accepting that loss is not the end, but a passage toward wisdom and remembrance. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. What do you take from the legacy of HMS Hood? Leave a comment with your reflections, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful untold histories from the deep. Together, we keep their memory alive.